Poor twins cry outside ICU. Millionaire walks in and recognizes their lullaby. The fluorescent lights of George Washington University Hospital cast harsh shadows across the sterile hallway as the evening shift began. Outside the intensive care unit, two small figures sat huddled together on a worn vinyl bench, their legs too short to touch the polished linoleum floor. 8-year-old twins Emma and Ethan Miller clung to each other, their matching blonde hair disheveled and their clothes wrinkled from 3 days of hospital waiting. Emma's voice trembled as she whispered the familiar melody their mother had sung. Every night before bed, "Hush now, my darling, close your tired eyes. Stars are dancing in the midnight skies." Ethan joined in, his voice barely audible through his tears. The lullaby was all they had left of the woman who now lay unconscious beyond the ICU doors, her body fighting complications from emergency surgery after a devastating car accident. The social worker, Mrs. Patterson, had explained their situation with gentle but firm words earlier that day. With no known relatives and their mother's condition critical, the twins faced an uncertain future. Their small apartment in southeast DC would soon be lost, their mother's job at the local diner already gone. But Emma and Ethan understood only one thing: they needed their mama to wake up. "She always said this song would keep us safe," Emma whispered to her brother, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Maybe if we keep singing it, she'll hear us." Down the hall, the elevator chimed, and out stepped Richard Caldwell, an imposing figure in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. At 52, Richard commanded respect in Washington's business circles. His real estate empire stretched across the East Coast, built from nothing after he'd aged out of the foster care system at 18. His assistant had scheduled this evening's visit to discuss acquiring the hospital's adjacent property for a luxury condominium development. Richard strode purposefully toward the administrative offices, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor. But as he passed the ICU waiting area, a sound made him freeze mid-step. The soft, trembling voices of the children reached his ears, carrying a melody that sent a chill down his spine. "Hush now, my darling, close your tired eyes. Stars are dancing in the midnight skies." The briefcase slipped from Richard's hand, hitting the floor with a metallic thud. His heart pounded as memories he'd buried for decades came flooding back. He was 7 years old again, lying on a thin mattress in a Chicago group home, listening to his mother sing that exact lullaby through the bars of a jail cell during their last visit together. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. Richard's mother, Sarah, had been only 19 when she'd had him, a teenage runaway with no family and no resources. She'd tried her best, working multiple jobs, but addiction had eventually taken hold. The lullaby was something she'd created, something uniquely theirs. He'd never heard it anywhere else, never found it in books or movies. He died with her when he was 8 years old. Slowly, Richard approached the bench where the twins sat. Emma looked up at him with red-rimmed blue eyes that reminded him painfully of his own childhood reflection. She clutched a worn teddy bear that had seen better days. "Excuse me," Richard said softly, his usual business demeanor cracking. "That song you were singing, where did you learn it?" Emma sniffled and looked at Ethan, uncertainty. Strangers in expensive suits didn't usually talk to kids like them. "Our mama taught it to us," she said quietly. "She made it up special, just for us." Richard's knees nearly buckled. "What's your mother's name?" "Jennifer Miller," Ethan said, his voice stronger than his sister's. "She's in there," he pointed toward the ICU doors. "The doctors won't tell us if she's going to be okay." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. Jennifer Miller. Jenny. His mind raced back 30 years to the group home in Chicago, to a scared 15-year-old girl who'd arrived the same week. He'd aged out. She'd been pregnant then, just beginning to show, kicked out by parents who couldn't accept their daughter's situation. Richard remembered their conversations in the common room, how she'd hummed that lullaby while rubbing her growing belly. He'd been 17, about to leave the system forever, and she'd been terrified of facing motherhood alone. They'd promised to stay in touch, but the chaos of foster care had torn them apart like it did to so many connections. "Jenny," he breathed, and both children looked at him with surprise. "You know our mama?" Emma asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in days. Richard sat down heavily on the bench beside them, his expensive suit suddenly feeling ridiculous in this place of raw human emotion. "I knew her a long time ago when we were both very young. She taught me that lullaby too." The hospital's evening sounds continued around them, monitors beeping, staff members walking by, the distant sound of the city beyond the windows. But in that moment, Richard felt as though the world had narrowed to just the three of them and the impossible coincidence that had brought them together. "Is she really our mama's friend?" Ethan asked, his 8-year-old skepticism warring with desperate hope. Richard nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes, she is, and I want to help." He stood up, his business instincts finally kicking in alongside his overwhelming personal investment. "Wait here. I'm going to talk to the doctors." As Richard walked toward the ICU desk, his mind was already working. He had resources, connections, the kind of influence that could move mountains in a city like Washington. For the first time in 30 years, he was going to use all of it not for profit, but for the family he'd never known he had. The night shift nurse, a kind-faced woman named Rosa, looked up as he approached. "Can I help you, sir? I need information about Jennifer Miller's condition," Richard said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting answers. "I'm family." As he waited for the medical update, Richard's eyes kept drifting back to the twins. Emma had resumed humming their lullaby, and Ethan sat protectively close to his sister. They had no idea that their world was about to change, that the stranger in the expensive suit was about to become the answer to prayers they'd been afraid to voice. The coincidence was overwhelming, almost impossible to believe. But as Richard listened to Emma's soft humming, he knew with absolute certainty that this was meant to happen. After 30 years of building walls around his heart, fate had used a children's lullaby to tear them all down in a single moment. Dr. Martinez emerged from the ICU at 11:47 p.m., her scrubs wrinkled from a 16-hour shift. She found Richard still sitting with the twins, who had finally fallen asleep against his shoulders. Emma on one side, Ethan on the other. The sight of the impeccably dressed businessman serving as a human pillow for two sleeping children would have been comical under different circumstances. "Mr. Caldwell," Dr. Martinez said softly, having been briefed on his involvement. "I have an update on Ms. Miller's condition." Richard gently shifted the children, careful not to wake them, and stood to receive the news. His heart hammered as he prepared for either devastating loss or miraculous hope. "The good news is that she's stable," Dr. Martinez began, and Richard felt his knees nearly give out with relief. "The surgery was successful, and we've managed to reduce the swelling in her brain. However, she's still in a medically induced coma while her body heals. It could be days or even weeks before we can wake her up." "But she will wake up?" Richard pressed, thinking of the two children whose entire world hung on the answer. "Her brain activity is strong, and all signs point to a full recovery. With time and proper care, yes, I believe she will make a complete recovery." Richard closed his eyes and said a silent prayer of gratitude. When he opened them, he saw Emma stirring on the bench, her blue eyes focusing on him with the confusion of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. "Where's the doctor?" she asked sleepily. "Did they tell us about Mama?" Richard knelt down to her eye level, his voice gentle. "Your Mama is going to be okay, sweetheart. She needs to sleep for a while longer to get better, but she's going to be fine." Emma's face crumpled with relief, and fresh tears began to flow, but these were tears of hope rather than despair. She woke Ethan with the news, and soon both children were crying and hugging each other with joy. "Can we see her?" Ethan asked. Dr. Martinez nodded. "For just a few minutes. She can't respond right now, but many patients in comas can hear their loved ones." As they prepared to enter the ICU, Richard's phone buzzed with urgent messages from his assistant about the morning's board meeting. For the first time in his career, he silenced the phone without reading them. His empire could wait. This moment belonged to Jenny and her children. The ICU was a maze of machines and monitors, but Jennifer Miller lay peacefully in the center of it all. At 37, she still had the same gentle features Richard remembered from their youth, though her face bore the lines of someone who'd worked hard to build a life for her children. Her blonde hair, the same shade as the twins, was spread across the white pillow. Emma and Ethan approached their mother's bedside with reverent silence. Emma took her mother's hand while Ethan smoothed her hair. "We brought someone to meet you, Mama," Emma whispered. "His name is Mr. Richard, and he knows our lullaby." Richard stood at the foot of the bed, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the moment. Here was Jenny, the frightened teenage girl he'd known so briefly, but never forgotten, now a mother who'd clearly raised two remarkable children despite facing the same challenges that had defined both their childhoods. "Hi, Jenny," he said softly. "It's been a long time." Over the next hour, as the twins spoke to their unconscious mother about their day, their fears and their excitement about her recovery, Richard found himself sharing stories about the woman he'd known 3 decades ago. He told them about Jenny's youngness in the group home, how she'd shared her meals with younger kids, how she'd hummed that lullaby to comfort others when nightmares struck. She was brave even then, Richard told the twins, and she was going to be an amazing mother. I can see that she kept that promise. As dawn approached, Mrs. Patterson, the social worker, arrived for her morning rounds. Richard had spent the quiet hours making phone calls, pulling strings, and arranging what he'd privately begun calling Operation Family. "Mr. Caldwell," Mrs. Patterson said, clearly surprised to find him still there. "I understand you've taken an interest in the Miller children's situation." Richard nodded. "Jenny and I were in foster care together. She's family. I want to help while she recovers." "The children need temporary placement," Mrs. Patterson explained gently. "With their mother's condition, it could be weeks or months before—" "They'll stay with me," Richard interrupted. "I want to apply for emergency kinship care. I have the resources to provide for them, and I'm not going to let them go into the system." Emma looked up from her mother's bedside. "You mean we can stay together and visit Mama every day?" "Every single day," Richard promised. "And when she wakes up, we'll all be here waiting for her." The legal paperwork took most of the morning, expedited by Richard's connections and resources. By noon, he found himself walking through the automatic doors of the hospital with 2 children, their small hands in his, stepping into the brilliant Washington, D.C. sunshine. His penthouse apartment overlooking the Potomac had never housed anyone under 40, but as Emma and Ethan explored their temporary new home with wide eyes, Richard realized how empty his success had felt without people to share it with. "This is like a castle," Ethan whispered, pressing his face against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's very nice," Emma said politely, even the diplomat. "But we just want to be with Mama." "I know," Richard said, kneeling down to their level. "Again. And we're going to visit her every day until she comes home, I promise." That evening, after a dinner of pizza on the terrace, Richard's first meal outside a restaurant in years, the twins began to droop with exhaustion. Richard had arranged for beds to be delivered, but for now they curled up on his leather sofa. "Mr. Richard," Emma said sleepily, "when Mama wakes up, will you still be our friend?" Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Forever," he promised. "You're stuck with me now." As he tucked them in with blankets from his linen closet, Emma began to hum their lullaby. Ethan joined in, and for the first time in 30 years, Richard sang along. "Hush now, my darling. Close your tired eyes. Stars are dancing in the midnight skies. Tomorrow's dreams are waiting there, wrapped in love and morning's prayer." When the children finally fell asleep, Richard stood on his terrace looking out at the city lights. His phone showed 47 missed calls and over 100 unread emails, but for once, none of it mattered. Tomorrow, he will restructure his priorities. He would hire the best tutors, the best doctors, whatever the twins and Jenny needed. He would use his fortune not to build another empire, but to build a family. The lullaby had brought them together, but love would keep them that way. 3 weeks later, Jennifer Miller opened her eyes to find her children sleeping in chairs beside her hospital bed, and a man she'd thought about countless times over the years, sitting quietly in the corner, reading to stay awake for her awakening. "Richard?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from the ventilator. He looked up and his face broke into a smile that erased 30 years of careful emotional distance. "Welcome back, Jenny. The twins are perfect, and they've been singing our lullaby every day, waiting for you to wake up." As Emma and Ethan stirred at the sound of their mother's voice, rushing to embrace her with careful joy, Richard stepped back to give them their moment. But Jennifer reached out her hand to him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping them safe, for being the family we needed." Richard took her hand, finally understanding that the fortune he'd spent his life building had been meaningless without people to share it with. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching me what family really means." 6 months later, the three of them moved into Richard's restored Victorian home in Georgetown, plenty of space for a growing family, with a garden where the twins could play and a music room where their lullaby echoed through the halls every evening. The song that had once comforted two frightened children in a group home had become the anthem of a family that chose each other, proving that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come not from what we plan, but from what we're brave enough to embrace when fate offers us a second chance at love. The end. Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.